Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Deep Dive. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel and click the bell icon so you never miss a new episode. Today we're going deep on a topic that is so crucial for understanding India, secularism. We've got a care bowl. We've got a stack of articles, historical texts, and even some recent court judgments. The works, whether you're a student prepping for those UPSC exams, just curious about Indian society, or maybe even planning a trip and want to understand the culture better. This deep dive is for you. It's like we hear about secularism all the time, but what does it really mean in a country as diverse as India? That's what I'm hoping to figure out today. And luckily, I'm not alone. Joining me is an expert who can untangle the threads of history, law, and society, the perfect guide to help us make sense of it all. What's fascinating about secularism in India is that it's not just some abstract concept. It's woven into the very fabric of the country.
That's right. We often think of secularism in terms of separating religion and state, which is certainly important. But in India, it's much more nuanced than that. It's about recognizing the role of religion in people's lives, while ensuring equality for all faiths.
Okay, so let's unpack this. When we say secularism in the Indian context, what are we actually talking about?
Imagine a society where people from all walks of life, Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs, Christians, Jains, Buddhists, everyone, can practice their faith freely, without fear of discrimination. That's the ideal.
Right. And it's not just about individual freedom. It's about the state treating all religions equally. No favoritism, no special treatment.
So it's like a level playing field for all religions.
Like
But
it.
doesn't that clash with the idea of India being a Hindu majority nation?
That's where things get interesting. India has always been a melting pot of cultures and faiths. You see evidence of this going back centuries. Think about the Ellora caves, for example. Oh, yeah. I remember reading about those. Hindu
Buddhist?
and Jain temples, all carved side by side. It's a visual representation of coexistence.
Right. Exactly. It speaks to a long tradition of tolerance and mutual respect that predates modern India. And this isn't just an isolated example. Take Emperor Ashoka in the 3rd century BC. He was a powerful ruler who converted to Buddhism, but still promoted respect for all faiths. He even had his edicts. Think ancient public service announcements, carved on pillars and rocks throughout his empire, urging people to live in harmony. One edict specifically says, harmony amongst sects is commendable. For an emperor to say that back then, that's a big deal.
Wow. So these ideas have been around for a long time. It's not just something that came about after independence.
Exactly. It's deeply rooted in the Indian ethos, even during the medieval period.
Yeah.
When new faiths like Islam arrived, you saw this spirit of inclusivity. The Bhakti and Sufi movements, for example, emphasized the universality of spiritual truth, drawing followers from across religious boundaries.
So we've got these ancient examples, and then these movements in the medieval era. It's starting to feel like secularism is almost ingrained in India's DNA. But what about British colonialism? Didn't their divide and rule policy create some serious tensions?
You're right. The British Raj definitely threw a wrench in the works. Their policies often exacerbated religious differences, leading to conflicts that unfortunately still have repercussions today. But even amidst this turmoil, the seeds of modern Indian secularism were being sown.
How so? Were Indian leaders at the time pushing back against this division?
Absolutely. The Indian independence movement itself was deeply rooted in the idea of a unified, secular India. Think of figures like Gandhi and Nehru, who envisioned a nation where people of all faiths would have equal rights and opportunities. They saw secularism not just as a political principle, but as a moral imperative.
So after centuries of these ideas simmering, the struggle for independence really solidified secularism as a core value for the newly formed nation.
Precisely. It became a cornerstone of the Indian constitution and a defining feature of the country's identity. But that's not to say it's been smooth sailing ever since. Understanding the journey of secularism in India is key to understanding the country as a whole. And that's what we're going to dive into next.
This is where it gets really interesting for me, because it feels like the story of secularism in India is also the story of modern India itself. So before we get into those challenges, let's take a step back and compare India's approach to secularism with what we see in the West. They seem pretty different.
Right. You've hit the nail on the head. There's a distinct difference. In many Western countries, secularism often translates to a strict separation of church and state, like building a wall between them.
Right, like the government can't fund religious schools or endorse any particular religion. It's all about individual freedom and keeping religion out of the public sphere.
Exactly. But in India, it's more nuanced. It's not about excluding religion from public life. It's about the state actively engaging with religion to ensure equality and fairness for all.
Hold on. Engage with religion. That sounds almost counterintuitive.
Think of it this way. India has a history of social inequalities tied to religion. So the Indian state steps in to address those imbalances and protect minority rights.
So it's less about keeping religion separate and more about managing religious pluralism. Is there an example that illustrates this difference?
Absolutely. Take state funding for minority educational institutions. In some Western countries, that would be a big no-no. But in India, it's seen as a way to ensure equal access to education and empower marginalized communities.
Okay, I'm starting to see the difference. So the Indian model is kind of tailored to the specific historical and social context of the country. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach.
Precisely. It's about finding a balance that works for India's unique circumstances. And to really understand how this balance evolved, we need to look at the visions of two key figures, Gandhi and Nehru.
Oh, yes. The architects of modern India. They must have had some strong opinions about secularism.
They did. Gandhi's philosophy was deeply rooted in tolerance and nonviolence. He believed in the equality of all religions, or Sarva Dharma Sambhava, as he called it.
I remember reading this incredible quote by Gandhi. He said, "I do not want my house to be walled in on all sides and my windows to be stuffed. I want the cultures of all lands to be blown about my house as freely as possible." It's like he's saying, let's embrace all these different perspectives.
That's a powerful way to put it. He saw different faiths as different paths, leading to the same ultimate truth.
So for Gandhi, secularism was almost like a spiritual principle. What about Nehru? Did he share this view?
Nehru was a bit more focused on the role of the state. He championed scientific humanism and state neutrality. He believed the state should neither promote nor interfere in religious matters, creating a space where all religions could thrive.
So while both Gandhi and Nehru were strong advocates for religious freedom, they came at it from slightly different angles. It's fascinating how these different perspectives converge to shape India's unique approach to secularism.
It's like they provided the blueprint. But the actual building of the secular edifice has been a complex and ongoing process, especially considering the realities on the ground.
Speaking of realities, let's not shy away from the tough questions. We've talked about the ideals, the historical roots, but what about the challenges that secularism faces in India today? I mean, it's a diverse country with a complex past. Surely there's some bumps along the way.
Oh, definitely. Secularism in India, while constitutionally enshrined, isn't some magic wand that makes all divisions disappear. There are constant challenges and tensions, for example. One major hurdle is the rise of communal politics.
You mean when political parties exploit religious sentiments for electoral gain? It's sad to see how religion, something that should unite, is sometimes used to divide people for political mileage.
It's a cynical tactic, but sadly, an effective one. And when politicians play this game, it undermines trust between communities, fueling tensions that can spill over into violence.
That's scary. So we've got these external forces like communal politics trying to chip away at the foundation. But are there internal challenges as well, like within different religious communities themselves?
Yes. The rise of religious fundamentalism within various communities poses a serious threat to secularism when people cling to rigid interpretations of their faith and see others as outsiders. It breeds intolerance and can lead to acts of violence and discrimination.
So it's not just about different religions clashing. It's also about these more extreme elements within each faith trying to assert themselves.
Exactly. It becomes a battle for control over narratives and identities. It's like this undercurrent of tension, pulling at the fabric of a society that's trying so hard to stay unified.
And this tension is probably further amplified in a country as diverse as India, with so many languages, cultures, and religions.
Absolutely. The very things that make India so vibrant and unique, its incredible diversity, also make it vulnerable to these divisive forces.
I'm curious, are there other factors that make upholding secularism in India such a complex task?
There are. Even some aspects of the legal framework itself can pose challenges.
Wait, really? I thought the Indian Constitution was pretty clear about secularism.
It is. But there are certain ambiguities in some laws that create dilemmas for a uniformly secular state.
Could you give us an example of what you mean?
Sure. Article 48 of the Constitution bans cow slaughter. Now this provision, while aimed at protecting the sentiments of Hindus who consider the cow sacred, clashes with the dietary practices of other communities. This kind of legal contradiction can fuel tension and make it difficult to find common ground.
Okay, so navigating these legal nuances adds another layer of complexity to the whole picture. It sounds like upholding secularism in India is a constant balancing act, juggling diverse interests, competing values, and a complex legal landscape.
It's definitely a tightrope walk. But despite all these challenges, it's important to remember that India has also made significant efforts to promote and strengthen secularism.
That's reassuring to hear. It's easy to get bogged down in the challenges. But what concrete steps has India taken to uphold these values?
Well, for starters, the 42nd Amendment to the Constitution in 1976 explicitly declared India a secular state. This was a landmark moment, officially enshrining secularism as a core principle of the Indian state.
So they basically put it in writing. This is who we are. But I imagine it goes beyond just words on paper.
Absolutely. India has also created institutions and programs specifically aimed at protecting minority rights and promoting interfaith harmony.
So like affirmative action programs or initiatives to foster dialogue between different religious groups.
Exactly. The Ministry of Minority Affairs, for example, implements various schemes for the socioeconomic empowerment of minority communities, like scholarship programs, skill development initiatives, and funding for educational institutions.
Okay, so it's about creating a level playing field, not just in theory, but in practice as well. That makes sense.
And then there's the National Integration Council, which brings together leaders from different religious and social groups to promote dialogue and understanding. The Prime Minister's 15-point program also focuses on improving the lives of minorities in areas like education, employment, and housing.
It sounds like there's a real push to translate the ideals of secularism into action. It's not just lip service. There are actual policies and initiatives on the ground.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that a truly secular society is not something you achieve overnight. It's an ongoing process that requires continuous effort, vigilance, and a commitment to dialogue and understanding.
And all of this, from the historical backdrop to the present-day challenges and initiatives, plays a crucial role in shaping the fabric of Indian society. For our listeners who are UPSC aspirants, this is gold.
Absolutely. Understanding the nuances of secularism in India is key to tackling several themes in the UPSC exams, especially in the General Studies Paper 1, which focuses on Indian society.
Knowing the historical context, the different models of secularism, the challenges India faces, it all adds up to a comprehensive understanding of the country's social and political landscape.
You've got it. But there's another key player in this whole equation, the Indian judiciary.
Oh, right. I almost forgot. The courts have played a huge role in shaping how secularism is interpreted and implemented in India.
They have indeed. And there have been some landmark judgments that have really cemented secularism as a non-negotiable principle in India. They have indeed. And there have been some landmark judgments that have really cemented secularism as a non-negotiable principle in India.
So let's talk about some of those landmark judgments. Are there any that really stand out as game changers for secularism in India?
Absolutely. One that comes to mind immediately is the Kesavananda Faradi case of 1973. This case was huge because the Supreme Court basically said that secularism is part of the basic structure of the Indian Constitution.
Okay, so basic structure. That sounds important. What does that even mean?
Think of it like the foundation of a house. You can renovate, redecorate, maybe even add an extension, but you can't mess with the foundation.
Right.
It's what holds the whole thing up.
Got it. So the Supreme Court was saying that secularism is so fundamental to India that it can't be removed or altered, even by amending the Constitution.
Exactly. That's how important it is. And then there's the S.R. Bomai versus Union of India case in 1994. This one really hammered home the point that the state cannot favor one religion over others. It basically said, no picking favorites, everyone gets treated equally.
So the courts have really been proactive in protecting secularism. They're not just interpreting the law. They're actively shaping how it's applied in everyday life. That's pretty powerful.
It is. And these judgments have a real impact on people's lives. For example, let's talk about the Shayara Bano case in 2017. This case challenged the practice of instant triple talaq, where a Muslim man could divorce his wife by just saying talaq 3 times.
I remember that case making headlines. It was pretty controversial, wasn't it?
It was. And for good reason. The Supreme Court ultimately declared instant triple talaq unconstitutional, arguing that it violated the fundamental rights of Muslim women.
So the court stepped in to protect the rights of women, even when it meant challenging a long-standing religious practice. That's a powerful statement about the balance between religious freedom and individual rights.
Exactly. And it shows how secularism in India isn't just about protecting religious freedom for its own sake. It's about ensuring that freedom doesn't come at the expense of equality and justice for all citizens.
This deep dive has been a real eye-opener. I feel like I've gotten a crash course, not only in secularism, but also in Indian history, law, and society.
It's all connected. You can't truly understand one without the other.
And for our listeners out there, especially those prepping for the UPSC exams. I hope this has been helpful in understanding this crucial aspect of Indian society.
Absolutely. Remember, for the UPSC, it's not just about knowing the facts. It's about understanding the nuances, the debates, the historical context.
Exactly. It's about being able to connect the dots and see the bigger picture. And speaking of connecting dots, I'm curious, with all these challenges and ongoing debates, what do you think the future holds for secularism in India?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's clear that secularism in India is a dynamic process. It's constantly being tested, challenged, and redefined as the country navigates its way through the 21st century.
So it's not just about preserving the past,
Yeah.
but also about shaping the future.
Exactly. It's about finding ways to uphold the core values of equality, justice, and freedom for all, while also adapting to the changing social and political landscape. And that's a journey we're all on together.
Well said. I think that's a perfect note to end on. It's been an absolute pleasure diving deep into this topic with you.
The pleasure was all mine.
And to all our listeners, thank you for joining us on this intellectual adventure. Don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and click the bell icon for more deep dives into fascinating topics. Until next time, stay curious.